So how do you hack happiness? Drugs, promiscuous sex, gambling, social media. We can keep going. There are a ton of ways you can hack your brain to get dopamine hits to make you feel fantastic, but you're not actually getting the growth that the happiness is supposed to be indicating, like eating good food or having a romantic relationship that leads to children and taking care and growth for the family and that sort of thing. That's what the reward is supposed to be doing. But if you say the meaning of life is happiness and then you go seek happiness, that's why everyone makes the mistake of going after pleasure and temporary highs, and they don't realize that growth is the real point. And so they should be looking for things that make them happy, that also make them grow, because those are the ones that are going to sustain themselves in the long term.
Welcome back to Enthusiastically Spiritual Podcast. I'm your host, Teresa. Well, my guest today is here to share about the meaning of life with us. His name is Nathanael Garrett Novosel, and he is a professional researcher and advisor with over 20 years of experience studying individual and group behavior. Over that time, he has researched psychology, evolutionary biology, organizational best practices, leadership decision-making, business, technology, finance, and philosophy to understand how the world as we know it works and why. Nathanael spent much of his career using the insights from this research to help the world's leading executives solve their most pressing organizational challenges and create their strategic plans. Noticing the common drivers of success in all areas of life, he decided to devote his research, problem-solving, and advisory skills to helping people live the best lives possible. Welcome, Nate.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. And so let's get to it. The meaning of life. This is a really big subject. What made you choose this subject?
Yeah, it's a long story. The short version is that when I was 5, my dad disappeared in the middle of the night, and turned out he moved to California by himself. And so we went out there about a year later when I was about 6. And when I came back from that, I don't remember what it was like when I was 5 because it's too young for memories. But when I was 6, I remember clearly we went out for 3 weeks and 2 days. I cried on the flight there because it was the first time I was away from my mother in my whole life. But then nothing could have prepared me for when I came back. Everything was fine. And then I went to bed, and I've never felt such pain in my entire life. It felt like someone ripped my heart out of my chest. I guess somewhere unconsciously I knew, I wasn't going to see my father for a long time, and who knows when, right? And so I felt like, it was like hopeless and worthless, and everything was just terrible. And in that moment, like a lot of people who have that kind of, moment in their lives, I asked myself, and I'm 6, asked myself, like, what is the point of all this if we're just going to suffer? That's a pretty common thing, turns out, that people ask themselves in that moment. But I'm a little bit different. So I found out decades later that I like right on the cusp of the autism spectrum. So like the Asperger's, I don't like to use the word autism because I'm not like on the far side of autism, but like I kind of think about things logically and kind of like, socially awkward and stuff. So there's a part of my brain in the back of my mind that's going, that's a fascinating question. I wonder if you can answer that. Meanwhile, I'm bawling my eyes out as a kid. So it's just like a weird dichotomy. So decades go by, and I study everything I can get my hands on in psychology. It might be a little bit because I was like, I don't understand human beings, so let me study it and understand how to fit in. But it's also a little bit of just fascination with the brain and how everything works and philosophy and so forth. And I was switching jobs. I advise executives for a living, and I was switching from one company to another. And I was thinking about like, oh, what would I say for my goodbye speech? I didn't end up giving anything fancy or anything, but I was like, oh, what would I tell people? So, well, success is this. I was kind of listening to some of the things, and that memory from when I was a kid about asking myself that question kind of popped back in my head. And said, well, Nate, you studied for this for decades. What's the answer? What's the point? Not what's just the key to success. And I said, well, the point is growth. And I was like, oh crap, like it just kind of like popped in my head. And because I was saying all these like desire and belief and all these other things, and suddenly I started going, wait a second, hold on, the point of life is growth, and then you need desire and belief to strive toward growth. And I was like, wait a second, this is a this is kind of a universal formula for how a human being finds meaning in their existence.
Mm-hmm.
So it was at that moment I said, I got to write this down. I started writing a book. It took about 7 years. It got published in 2020. And so, yeah, it's just a very scientific view of how life works, why it works the way it does, how someone finds meaning in their lives, and what they can do to inject their lives with more meaning if they're not feeling like it has as much as they'd
Mm-hmm.
like.
You know what I like about your approach, Nate, is that it is analytical. So
Mhm.
I believe that there's space for everyone, and there's people that are going to resonate with the analytical approach, which is wonderful, and then there's people going to resonate with the woo woo approach and the other approach, and so there's a space for everything. And your book is a beautiful, I would say, it's a pathway, is what I
Mhm.
would say as I was reading it, and I'll hold it up here, and obviously the people on YouTube can see it, but it's a
Mhm.
wonderful, wonderful pathway into really understanding these key areas of who we are as a being. And but it's more analytical, and it's more,
Mhm.
I mean, you have a lot of just it's packed full of good insights in there for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, it's the thing that I really wanted to get right, because there were a lot of things I noticed about people writing, whether it was a self-help book or a philosophy book or a religious text or whatever. There were a lot of things that bothered me. The biggest one that bothered me was that they'd conflate ethics with meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And so they couldn't give you advice about how to live your life optimally without giving ethical recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, I don't know. I don't know the person who's reading it. I don't know anything about their lives, so I don't know the right ethical approach to take, nor should I be recommending ethics to them. They could be in a culture where they have a completely different set of ethics than me. So I wanted to separate the ethics and meaning and the goal and all these other
Mm-hmm.
components that people just kind of mash together into one unified philosophy of the world. But the other thing is I wanted to be able to. I know if you kind of try to shoot for everyone, you shoot for no one. I get that, but I tilt at windmills. So I said, well, why don't I get people, whether you're an atheist or you're religious or you're spiritual, these are unifying. This is a unifying set of principles that every philosophy has to address, and every philosophy does address them in their own way, because these are the drivers of meaning. And you can't have a philosophy that gives you meaning in your life without addressing the 8 concepts in the book. So that's what I love about it, is you can be spiritual and use these 8 concepts. You can be religious and use these 8 concepts. You can
Mm-hmm.
be an atheist and use these 8 concepts, and they work regardless, because they're literally how the mind works, how humans evolved, how biology works, and how philosophy works to come together to give someone a feeling that, yeah, my life has significance in the universe.
Mm-hmm. And so through all your studying and your living life, because that's a lot of it too, right? We walk our
Yeah.
talk. You've obviously noticed that there's a lot of patterns in people. So I'd like you to share a little bit about your discovery of that.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of things, and you'll notice that the introduction is kind of a hodgepodge. There's this long list of things I studied, and that's intentional, not just to give you a tongue twister, although that is kind of amusing. But in all seriousness, you see, it's like finance and psychology and
Mm-hmm.
philosophy and business. Like, what do those have to do with each other? Well,
Mm-hmm.
it turns out that a lot of different groups, a lot of famous people in history, they actually figured all this out, but they didn't put it in the way that I did. They didn't articulate in the way that I did. And I think that it was important to be explicit about what they were saying. I mean, there are some, classic, sayings that everyone says, like, life is a journey, not a destination. That's true. It's a growth journey.
Mm-hmm.
That's the journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't actually define it in that cute little saying, but that's what they're trying to say. HR in businesses, actually, they literally capture the meaning of life in how they hire people. It's
Mm-hmm.
really bizarre. But
Mm-hmm.
if you look at a resume, what does a resume have? The very top, an objective. That's your goal. It has what? A list of experiences. That's what you've done in the past that have led you up to
Mm-hmm.
attain that goal. Like, it's just like insane how, like, they really, in order to find the right person for the right position at the right time to do the thing
Mm-hmm.
they need to do to achieve the goal as an organization, they optimize exactly the same components that my book has
Mm-hmm.
as to how to
Exactly.
hire a person. But it's not just HR. Then you've got over on philosophies, law of attraction.
Mm-hmm.
I know, as you talk about like co-creation stuff, that's a lot of language used in the law of attraction type modalities. And they talk about you need desire, believe, receive. Those are two of the concepts of the universal eight that you need to actually live a meaningful life.
Mhm.
So all these philosophies either address the points or embody the points. They may disagree on certain parts of the points, like ethics. I mentioned everyone would disagree about that. So what I did in those circumstances or in those situations is I said, well, this is what it means to ethics or desire or belief or whatever, and here's how it works from evolution. I know it's kind of boring for some people, but I went back to single-celled organisms. Single-celled organisms actually do exhibit very rudimentary forms of all eight of these concepts, and then worked all the way up to humans, and then say, okay, this is how it applies to you. But I stop at the point of starting to recommend you should want this, or you should have these ethics, or you should believe this. That's the point at which I stop, so that I don't, inject my own personal beliefs onto someone else, which I believe in. Just in the way I was trying to do it, I believe that's unethical to not tell a person. You're like, hey, look, I want to give you actionable advice, and so I'm going to tell you how I do it, but it's not, you might not be right for everyone. Most people say, thou shalt do this or thou shalt do that, and this is the right way because I said so. And it's like that rubs me a little bit of the wrong way. So I wanted my book to be different, so it stops short of saying you should do this precisely. It's say, here's how you figure it out. Yeah.
Right, right. Just a pathway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the word happiness, because I know you've written down that happiness is an indicator, not a goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love you to share a little bit about your discovery of what real happiness is.
Yeah, so there's a biological side to it, and then there's a conceptual or logical side to it. And I think the problem is that people don't know either in terms of how it works, and so they assume that the goal or the meaning of life is to be happy, because that's what everyone seems to be shooting for, right? But when you think about how happiness works, I mean, what is an emotion? An emotion is it's a biochemical reward system. So it gives you feedback. It's a feedback mechanism, but it's also, of course, a motivator, right? So it's a reward for afterwards. It's motivating factor or driving factor forward, and it kind of works as both for that. And so if you eat food, you're happy, right? You sleep, you feel better, right? So you feel good when you do growth enabling things. And when you experience harm or you're afraid or anticipate harm, you're either afraid or you're hurt or you're in pain, and you're getting feedback saying, hey, this is no good, stop. And so that's how emotions work. So emotions are a feedback mechanism, an indicator of your relationship toward growth and harm. And because of that, it's not a goal, because the goal is whatever it is you're trying to, like, you need to eat. The food is the goal to nourish yourself, to grow, and the emotion is saying you grew, good job, you're happy now, you had food. So what happens, and here's the trick about indicators, is that indicators, especially when you try to make the indicator the goal, you can hack any indicator. And I joke about this in my professional life, because I say, like, anything you can measure, they say what you can measure, you can manage. That's a business thing. What I say is what you can measure will be gained. And so I say, so if you measure my productivity based on how long I've been sitting in my office chair, the first thing I'm going to do is learn how you measure that. And let's say it's weight of the chair, in the chair. And I'll say, okay, so I'll go buy a cinder block. When I have to go to the bathroom, I'll get up, I'll put the cinder block in the chair, I'll go to the bathroom, do whatever, come back, take the cinder block off, and sit down. So what were you trying to measure? What was the goal? Productivity. What did you actually measure? Time and seat. I hacked the measure. You didn't get the goal of productivity, you got the measure. And happiness is just that. So how do you hack happiness? Drugs, promiscuous sex, gambling, social media. We can keep going. There are a ton of ways you can hack your brain to get dopamine hits to make you feel fantastic, but you're not actually getting the growth that the happiness is supposed to be indicating, like eating good food or having a romantic relationship that leads to children and taking care of growth for the family and that sort of thing. That's what the reward is supposed to be doing. But if you say the meaning of life is happiness and then you go seek happiness, that's why everyone makes the mistake of going after pleasure and temporary highs, and they don't realize that growth is the real point. And so they should be looking for things that make them happy, that also make them grow, because those are the ones that are going to sustain themselves in the long term. So that's why it's so important to know it's an indicator, not a goal. Your goal is growth in the areas that matter to you. And happiness is an indicator. When you seek growth, you will get happiness. If you seek happiness, you will get, you know, temporary pleasures that don't fulfill you ultimately.
And I know then that's obviously one of your chapters in your book
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
happiness
Well, it's emotions. Yeah. It's,
or emotions. Yeah.
because the overall category, and that's, what is it? One, two, three, was that the fifth chapter?
I think so.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. The emotions. Yeah.
Yeah. What's really cool about it is I created a formula for it, because everyone said, Nate, you're really in touch with your emotions. And I'm like, okay, because I think of everything analytically, so I know exactly why I feel anything, because I'm like a robot trying to understand. Like, well, why did I do that? Well, that happened, then that happened. Okay, but not everyone's like that, right? They got deep-seated, pains and things from childhood, um, and so the thing is, though, that there's a formula for all emotional states, and I don't know why no one's ever figured this out before. Maybe they did, and I don't know about it, but I wrote down. It's really cool. So all your emotional states equal a combination of the following three components. And not coincidentally, there's three other components of the meaning of life, of the eight. It's desire plus belief plus experience. Now, why those three things and why are they combined? Well, as we just talked about, emotions are a feedback system. So the basic biological, psychological state is the what they call stimulus response. They call that in those scientific fields. And the experience is, you experience a stimulus, and then your emotion is the response. In this example, there are other responses you have, but the emotion ones when we're talking about. And so, okay, so that you need stimulus response. That's the core of all biology. And so what else? So why the desire and belief? Well, we're human beings with advanced brains. So we don't just relate to experiences that are happening. We react to everything, things we're thinking about and all this other stuff, right? Stuff that's not happening, but you're thinking about. Those are combination of your desire and your belief. What you want and what you believe. So if you, and I give an example, like jealousy, for example, is my favorite one because it's pretty clear and obvious. So you want a person or thing, that's the desire. You believe that you deserve that person or thing. More importantly, there's probably someone else that you believe does not deserve that person or thing. And then you see that person that you don't think deserves it with that person or thing you want, and now you get jealous. And what's cool about it is why the formula is so, well, I mean, it's perfect. It's not like I invented the formula, it exists and I just identified it. But the reason why it's so perfect is that, well, what would you do to get rid of your jealousy? And people actually do these things. So the first thing is to look away. That change your experience. You're no longer looking at the thing causing you the pain, the jealousy. You can change your beliefs, and people do that all the time. Everyone knows that in Aesop's fables, they call it sour grapes because the fox is going after the grapes. Although that's technically a belief, changing a belief that changes your desire, right? So he was saying those grapes are sour anyway, and so now he doesn't want the grapes because he's convinced himself that the grapes are bad. So in this case, it'd be like, oh, well, that person's, a bad person anyway. I was gonna say some bad stuff, but anyway, I won't say that. But that person's no good. So I don't like that person anyway. So you either squelch your desire with a new belief, or you can change your belief in another way. So you could say, that person is a really good person. They deserve that person. I hope to have someone like that person. It's just not that person. All of a sudden now your jealousy switches to like admiration of that person. Oh, I hope I have someone like that too. That's great. What a good person. What a great couple. Now you're switching your emotions to admiration. So that's what I love about the formula. And it helps you to hack your own emotional state at any time, because you can say, okay, well, why do I feel this way? Well, I want something, I believe something, and I'm experiencing something. Well, how do I change one of those three variables to feel better?
Wow. So in your journey, Nate, with having come obviously full circle with this, the meaning of life book, and what you've come through as a soul and your experiences. So how are you with the healing? How have you been with like your dad and the situation that happened when you were younger?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I don't know. It's hard because, like, even though I've done all the studying and I understand how everything works, that doesn't necessarily make me great at it, at being a human being. It's kind of ironic, but it's like, Tom Brady. I mean, I know he just retired, but he had coaches for years. He's the best who ever played the game in the position of quarterback. But he had plenty of coaches who gave him great advice, right?
Mm-hmm.
But those coaches weren't better than Tom Brady. So like, oh, you're telling me how to do my job as Tom Brady, and you're just some coach, right? But that's not how that works. People will give advice and coach. They can see things that the person who's doing it can't.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of one of those people. Like I can analyze, I can tell you everything's going on. I can help other people make good decisions. But in terms of my own social interaction, it's just really difficult because I just don't have a lot of the stuff that people like, a lot of pleasantries and things that people do in the social lubrication, as they call it. I just don't understand it. I don't have the tolerance for it, and so on and so forth. So, like for me, I was raised, be honest and be responsible and do good things and this sort of thing, and don't be selfish and all these other things. And I'll just use my dad as an example, but there are a lot of people in my life that I have plenty of examples of. But with my father, it's like he's always been a very selfish person. I mean, like borderline what you might call it a narcissist, because he only cares about himself. I mean, he's done some crazy things, like just abandoned my stepmother and just left and just took an Uber home and didn't tell anyone, and they thought he was kidnapped or something or killed or something, and he didn't say anything, and then they got home and he was there and he was like, oh, I just didn't feel like being there anymore. It's like you didn't have any consideration for any other person's emotions like anyone else. And so I told him to his face, because I don't have that. I just like, I don't think you're a really good person. So I'm just like, So he got super offended and told me it was my fault and I was too sensitive, and and even if it was his fault, he was going to change. He was too old to change or something. And so I said, okay. So I was like, okay, whatever. So I stopped talking to him, and it's just like, that's it.
Yeah.
So I mean, like in terms of like healing, I'll always have the problem is how you come attached to things, like people get attached to their anger and stuff. I totally get where people are coming from with that. I mean, I hope like you can let go of stuff like anger and things that are holding you back. But and maybe it's for better or for worse. I always have a chip on my shoulder. It's like, oh, I always got to prove myself. I should probably get over a lot of that stuff. I don't know if I ever will, because I always feel like, oh, I need to prove everything. But I kind of like it though too. Like I kind of like, because it's like I could do the work. It pushes me to work hard, and it makes me who I am. I couldn't have written the book if that all didn't happen to me. So it's one of those things where like, can you really regret something that happened if it led to something good? It's one of those hard things you can never figure out. So I don't really have a good answer to your point about that. I just try to accept, like he did his thing. Maybe you could take speaking of changing your emotional state through changing your beliefs. I can accept the beliefs that my life was better without. I mean, could you imagine how bad having a narcissist in your life your entire life would have been? Probably would have been a lot worse. So maybe I should be grateful. Or who cares? I'm living my life now. So what's the difference? Like that's the take I usually make, is because when I was a kid, he used to actually call when I was younger, and I used to not really talk to him, and he'd be like, what's going on? I'm like, not much. He's like, how are you doing? I'm like, fine. And he was like, okay, you don't want to talk? I'm like, in my head, I never said this to his face, but in my head, I was like, well, if you were here, you know the answer to all these questions. So this is kind of like, and I meant that matter of factly, not like in a not that kind of way, but literally, I was just like, well, why do I need to answer all these questions? If you were here, you would just know it all, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. So like, I've just always kind of had that kind of attitude toward it. So yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you, but it is what it is. I talked to because I study all kinds of modalities, so I did talk to people with like you can see energy and psychic stuff, and they said, oh yeah, I see a lot of like negative energy right behind you, like stuff you put behind you. Like, yeah, like that's that. I got it,
there, right, Nate?
Yeah, and they're like, well, you can address that whenever you like. I was like, what am I gonna do? There's nothing to do. I have nothing else to say.
Yes,
like, that's it. So
I always like to say that, because even for myself, doing my spiritual work and my energy and whatever I do, I still go through stuff. Like, we're human, and we're going to go through things, and we have situations that have come up with other people that we can either work on healing this lifetime or maybe not, because it also does depend upon the other person too. So it's not just about Nate; it's about his, your dad and his energy and where he's at as a soul too. So he may not this lifetime be able to even go there with you. So. But the fact that you've gotten to a place where, you've written this amazing book, it's obviously helping people out in the world with your service and what you're offering. That's beautiful. So I also like to say, doing the best we can do. Right, Nate?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I like that. It's what I like to do. I like to
Hmm.
solve problems. I like to analyze things. I like
Hmm.
to understand stuff. I do run into a problem because I'm kind of obsessive with like, oh, I gotta figure this out and solve it. Like I
Hmm.
said, it took me 7 years to make that book the way I wanted it to,
Hmm.
and I finally just gave myself a deadline and went after it and completed it. But yeah, it can be difficult because you know there are so many competing perspectives on
Hmm.
reality and everything like that, and when you come to something and you work so hard to rigorously be able to scientifically prove everything you put in there, so I
Hmm.
have all the evidence and all the data behind it and stuff, and I cited 150 sources, and
Hmm.
like I went through all that, and then someone just go, nah, it's not this, it's something else. It's like, no, you don't understand. This is legit. This is like, universally applicable and stuff. And I'm not telling anyone what to, like I don't answer the big questions like whether God exists or anything like that. In fact, the only time I mention God is to say, can we please put that conversation aside, because you can't answer it until you die, and then you'll figure it out.
Right. Yeah.
Either it happened or what, I don't know. But I said, look, can we talk about the things that in this life that we do know?
Hmm.
And if you are religious, I'd like you to stay along for it, because if in your, and I would say like, hey, in monotheist belief, that's like, look, God gave you all these abilities. I'm going to explain these abilities to you, and you'll
Hmm.
know what God gave you. And if you don't believe in that, well, then these are just things that exist, and that's fine too. It didn't matter
Exactly.
to me. So yeah, it's a tough one to kind of fight, though, that there are plenty of subjective opinions, what's right, what's wrong, all this other
Hmm.
stuff. So it's kind of hard, like especially like in the social media age where everyone can just scream, whatever they feel like at the time, to go and
Hmm.
look at people going, no, you're wrong, and not to get sucked into it,
Hmm.
and to try to, like, I got to do my social media posts that say, hey, I wrote a blog and this is the point today. But yeah, it's hard to get sucked in, but you just got to try to, you know, stay, put it aside once in a while and take a deep breath and
And do the
accept
best
the
we can
facts.
do, right, Nate?
Yeah,
Do the
yeah,
best we can do. So
exactly.
let's talk about how you support people and what your offerings are. What are your services?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I try to keep it as simple as possible. I mean, if you're interested in the 8 drivers, which by the way I should mention them, just I'm not trying to hide them or anything. So the 8 drivers of meaning in someone's life, we talked about most of them, but I'll list them out: growth, experience, desire, belief, emotions, ethics, support, and choice. I think support and choice were the only two we hadn't talked about
Hmm.
thus far. So those are the 8. And each chapter, it's really cute. Each chapter is one of the 8. It's one word. It's like very easy to keep in mind. And then it goes through a long explanation of evolutionary biology and psychology. And then it tells you what to do with that information. So I have the book. I wrote a chapter as a multi-author book, The X Factor, this spiritual secrets of successful executives and entrepreneurs. I think I got that right. And I wrote a chapter on how to find more meaning in your job and how to find what you really want to do in your job. So I wrote a guest chapter on that. So that's on sale, and all the proceeds of that go to charity. So I don't
Oh,
see any of
nice.
that. I think it still goes to Penn State Dance Marathon. That's my alma mater, and it's great. My co-ed business fraternity, that was their big thing, was to donate to Thon every year. So yeah, all the proceeds still go to that. As far as I know, it goes to charity. I think it still goes to that one. But then my book is the only thing I really like effectively profit off of. Everything else, I have a blog that's on the site. It's
Mhm.
freely accessible. I don't put any ads on it or anything. I just don't.
Mhm.
Ads are ugly, and I don't want them on there.
I hear
And
you.
then the social media pages at Life the Book and the Meaning of Life book. The Life the Book is the most common one, but if I couldn't get that, I got the Meaning of Life book. And yeah, I mean that's pretty much. I do some videos on YouTube and Rumble, so views count toward that. But yeah, I don't do like personal like one-on-one coaching or anything
Mhm.
like that. I do it for a living, so I still do my executive advisory
Mhm.
role. So I just don't have. I basically write in my free time, and that's about it. One day I would like to be able to switch over and kind of do
Mhm.
it full time, but yeah, I'm not like because I was so obsessed with getting answers. I didn't really, because most people channel that into something useful, like, oh, I'm going to be a clinical psychologist, or I'm gonna go learn some sort of field to help someone else with it. I'm like, no, no, no. I just want to be able to explain it and be able to write down and then tell everyone about it. And so that's the skill set I have is research advisory. That's all I've got.
Hey, that works, Nate. That works.
So I'm gonna write. I got more books in the pipeline that I one day I will finally be able to get through. But yeah, it's really the book. If anyone wants to support, you can go ahead and check out the site, check out the book. Like videos and stuff. All that stuff that doesn't cost anything actually goes to the algorithm and gets me seen by more people, and it helps more people. So.
Great. And I will have all those links in the show notes so they'll know how to get a hold of the book, get a hold of your website, check out, what you have offering on there and your blogs. And I appreciate you so much coming on today, Nate. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much. And if anyone has questions and they send them over to you, and you need any answers, just let me know. Happy to help in any way I can.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for listening in to another episode of Enthusiastically Spiritual. And a big thanks for Nate for coming on this week and sharing his book, The Meaning of Life, A Guide to Finding Your Life's Purpose. And again, all the information to find his book and his website, will be in the show notes. So until next week, please make sure that if you've not subscribed to this episode, that you do hit subscribe so that way you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. Please make sure you like. I would love to hear a comment. And also, please feel free to share this with your friends and family. And also, if you'd like to support this podcast, please make your way to the show notes where there is a link to Pod Inbox where you can support. You can also leave a message for me. You could also pay for an upcoming shout out on one of the upcoming episodes and get a hey from me. And you can also find other ways in the show notes to support this podcast. Thank you so much again. And until next week, remember that life is too short to not be enthusiastic about your unique journey.